Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to dive into a pretty powerful recipe for success, one that comes from some seriously ancient wisdom. This is our breakdown of this week's Sabbath School lesson, which is called Recipe for Success. It's all part of the study guide Second Chances, the book of Joshua. And really, it's this timeless story about new beginnings, huge challenges, and what it truly means to succeed. So let's get into it. So to get us started, I want to share a really cool story from our time. There's this famous orchestra conductor, Benjamin Zander, who had this incredible way of teaching his music students. Day one of class, he'd give every single student an A. The only thing they had to do was write him a letter, dated for the end of the semester, describing who they had become to deserve that grade. You see what he did there? He completely reframed success. It wasn't some heavy expectation to live up to, but an exciting possibility to live into. And that one little shift, from pressure to promise, well, that's exactly what we're about to see on a much, much bigger stage. Because that whole idea, living into a new possibility, that is precisely where the ancient Israelites found themselves right at the beginning of the book of Joshua. I mean, they were literally standing on the edge of a promise, about to step into a future that had only been talked about for generations. What you're looking at here is this incredible moment of contrast. On the one hand, you have the past. 40 long years in the wilderness under the legendary Moses. That whole chapter, with all its miracles and all its mistakes, was officially over. And then, on the other hand, you have the future. A brand new generation, a new leader in Joshua, and the promised land waiting just across the river. It was this massive shift from a finished story to a wide open possibility. But, stepping into that kind of future, that's a heavy thing. And you can actually feel the weight of it right in the text. Get this. In the very first chapter, Moses, the leader who's now gone, is mentioned 10 times. But Joshua, the new guy in charge, his name only comes up 4 times. He's even still being called Moses' assistant. It's like the story is practically screaming at us that this is about more than just the human leader. It's pointing us to who is really in charge. All right, so what was this recipe for success that God gave to Joshua and this new generation? Well, like any good recipe, it all starts with the core ingredients. And in this case, those ingredients were the unshakable, absolutely foundational promises of God. And there's this really fascinating detail in the original Hebrew that you just have to see. God tells Joshua that he's giving them the land, but then in the very next verse, the grammar shifts as if he has already given it to them. It's a tense known as the prophetic perfect. It's God's way of speaking about a future promise as if it's already a done deal. That's how certain his promises are. They're basically a present reality. And this wasn't just some vague, good luck kind of promise. No, God laid out a crystal clear blueprint. The entire book of Joshua is actually built around these 4 initiatives. The mission is laid out from the very start. Cross, take, divide, and serve. It's a powerful signal right from the beginning that God's plan isn't improvised. It is intentional and perfectly structured. But of all the ingredients, of all the promises, this was the absolute cornerstone. More important than the land, more important than the battle plan, was this simple guarantee of God's personal presence. I will be with you. They weren't just being sent on a mission. Their real leader was going with them every step of the way. Okay, so God's got his part covered. He provides the promise and the plan. But what about the human side of the recipe? Success was going to require a faithful response from Joshua and the people. So God tells Joshua, not just once, but twice in this passage, to be strong and very courageous. Now, you might hear that and think, okay, this is just a pre-battle pep talk, right? But the challenges ahead weren't just the giant fortified cities of Canaan. The courage God was calling for here was deeply spiritual. It was the courage to trust and obey him, even when everything around them was screaming to do the opposite. And this is where we see the 2-part method at the heart of the recipe. First, it's about your internal posture. Be strong and courageous by trusting in God's presence. And second, it's about your external action. Constantly meditate on God's word and obey it, like meticulously, without turning to the right or to the left. Courage and obedience, they're 2 sides of the very same coin. And look, this is where it gets really personal for us, right? We might not be facing literal fortified walls, but we have our own spiritual battles, don't we? Battles against our own tendencies, against cultural pressures, against what the Bible calls the forces of darkness. And just like Joshua, we're called to fight, not with physical weapons, but with that exact same spiritual courage and an unwavering faithfulness to God's word. So, if they follow this recipe, God says it will lead to prosperity and success. But that brings up a really important question. What does success actually look like from a biblical point of view? Because when we hear those words, our minds, they immediately jump to things like wealth or status or career achievements. But the Bible, and specifically the original Hebrew here, it paints a much richer and honestly a much deeper picture of what it really means to succeed. So to really get it, we've got to look at the original Hebrew words. It's so cool. The word we translate as prosperous, tzalak, it really means to push through and accomplish the mission you were given. It's all about fulfilling a God-given purpose. And the word for successful, sakal, that means to act with wisdom and prudence, to live skillfully according to God's principles. So it's not about accumulation, it's about accomplishment and wisdom. And that just changes everything, doesn't it? Biblical success isn't about what you have. It's about being in harmony with God's will and having the wisdom to carry it out. True prosperity is being aligned with His plan and walking in His ways. Okay, so the big question now is, how do we take this ancient recipe from the plains of Moab and actually apply it to our lives today in a world that feels so different? Well, here's what it all boils down to for us. First, we have to remember that God's mission is still going, and His promise to be with us is just as real today as it was for Joshua. That means we have to completely redefine how we measure success, not by what the world values, but by our faithfulness and our wisdom. The promised lands in our own lives, well, they're claimed by a faith that gets up and does something. And that leads to the final crucial point. Faith in God and obedience to His word aren't enemies, they're partners. True trust in God always leads to a life that follows His ways. Look, there is so much to unpack here, and the principles run deep. If any of this has sparked your interest and you want to explore these ideas even more, please feel free to reach out to Pastor Denny Rise. His email is right there on the screen. That ancient recipe is just as potent today as it was thousands of years ago. God's presence is our promise, and our courageous obedience is the response. Thanks so much for joining this explainer, and as you go, maybe ask yourself this. If success is really about fulfilling God's mission for you, what Jordan River is He asking you to cross in faith today? We really look forward to our study with you next week.